The 5th of July, 1914. A week has passed after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. The Austrians want to take action. They want war with the Serbs, who they think are behind the group of ragged young men that actually pulled the trigger. But before they can have their war, they decide they must consult with their much stronger ally, the German Empire. They go to the Kaiser and tell him that this is intolerable, that they cannot abide such a humiliation, that they cannot let this act of terrorism go unpunished. And the Kaiser says to them, "We'll back you, whatever you do. Just act and act quickly. Germany is behind you without reservation." The Kaiser thinks that general war can be avoided, that if the Austrians strike while all of Europe is enraged over this assassination, if they act while the brutal slaughter of the Archduke and Duchess is still fresh in people's minds, no one will raise a finger to defend Serbia. And even if the Russian Empire decided that they wanted to protect their Serbian allies, if the Austrians can strike quickly, it'll be a fait accompli. The war will be over before the Russians can mobilize their forces. But in Austria, there was disagreement. The Hungarian part of their empire initially objects to war. They hope that a peaceful solution might be found. The Archduke was perhaps the greatest defender of the Serbs in the empire, and so when moderation was called for, the parties for war simply had to point to his death and say, "He was their greatest friend, and look what they did to him. What do you think they're going to do to us?" And all arguments were quelled. So at last, the Hungarians relented on one condition, a condition that will be important later, that the Austro-Hungarian Empire would not annex a foot of Serbian land. And with that, the Austrians began drafting an ultimatum to Serbia. But this ultimatum is delayed by a chance for peace. Two men, the ambassador from Austria and the ambassador from Russia to Serbia, met in Belgrade. On the 10th of July, the Russian ambassador arrives at the house of the ambassador from Austria-Hungary. The details are agreed to. The plan is set. Both sides are open, things are going well, and then the Russian ambassador falls dead of a heart attack. Nothing signed. No war stopped. The Serbians blame the Austrians. Rumors circulate that they had the Russian ambassador assassinated, that the Austrian ambassador killed him in his own house. Worse still, this leaves the Russians without an ambassador in Serbia. They have nobody with the experience, connections, or familiarity with Serbia that the former ambassador had to send out. And even if they did, it'd take weeks to get them appointed and shipped from Moscow to Sarajevo. Weeks they don't have. But with this last overture turning to catastrophe, the Austrians decide it's finally time to send their ultimatum. But they can't. Again, they delay. You see, President Poincaré, the leader of France, is going to Russia to meet with the Tsar. And the Austrians, ever nervous, decide that they can't send the ultimatum while their two greatest adversaries are meeting together in the same place. They could make decisions too quickly. They could coordinate in ways they normally couldn't when they're 1,000 miles apart. So the Austrians delay. They wait until Poincaré is 100 miles out to sea before sending their ultimatum. But at last, on the 23rd of July, an ultimatum is sent from the Austrians to the Serbs. The Serbs have 48 hours to agree to all points or face war. The ultimatum asks many things, but most of all it asks that Austrian police be granted free rein to investigate the assassination on Serbian land. This is impossible. To agree to such a thing is tantamount to giving up sovereignty. No nation would accept this. But that's all right because the ultimatum is only a ruse anyway, a cover for what the Austrians really want. The Austrians want war. They want the ultimatum to be rejected because they want to appear to the world as though they gave the Serbs a chance to avoid a conflict. On 24th of July, Sergei Sazonov, the foreign minister of Russia, got the copy of ultimatum, read it, and said, "It's a European war." Russians resolved to ask the Austrians to give the Serbs more time, while at the same time pushing the Serbs not to resist the Austrians. They also make the fateful decision to begin a partial mobilization of their forces along the Austrian border. The same day, Russians got the French support. With Sazonov confirming the unwavering support of the French, they decide to fully back Serbia, even to the point of war. You see, Russia's main concern was that Austria would annex Serbia. If the Austrians planned to conquer Serbia, then it had to be war. But remember earlier when the Austro-Hungarians were arguing among themselves about the ultimatum, That Hungarian element wouldn't lend its voice to war unless the other members of the Austro-Hungarian Empire agreed that they would not annex a foot of Serbian soil. But nobody told this to Russians. The hands of fate tighten around the neck of Europe. The next day, the Austrians reject demands that they extend the deadline. And 2 minutes before the ultimatum expires, the Serbians send Austria their reply. Defeated, they're about to give in to all demands. But they got info that the Russians have started to mobilize. They changed their reply. In their reply, the Serbians agree to 9 out of 10 Austrian demands. They only refuse to allow Austrian officials to have police powers within Serbia. Austrians are livid at the Serbian reply, but like always, they turn to their German allies for advice. They say, "What? You haven't declared war already? A month has gone by. We're losing the sympathies of the people of Europe." You see, after the assassination of the Archduke, public opinion in Europe weighed heavily against Serbia. It was politically impossible for anybody to support them then. But now a month has passed, and this reply, this meeting of most of the Austrian demands and this offer for mediation made the Serbs seem like the reasonable party. After all, what more could Austria want? Austrian Minister Berchtold returns to Austria-Hungary and for the first time speaks with the Chief of Staff of the Austrian Army, who said that army is not ready yet and before get us a guarantee of Russian neutrality, and then maybe we can talk about mobilizing against the Serbs. Berchtold didn't know what to do, and he decided to declare war. He can placate the Germans and be able to use that threat to get the Serbs to capitulate before he even needs the Austrian army to be ready to fight. We've all at one time or another gotten ourselves into an impossible situation and let ourselves believe in some wild, harebrained solution that'll surely fix everything. Only when we do that, the fate of the world isn't usually hanging in our hands. And so, on the 28th of July, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. The same time, mobilization started in Russia. This night, Nicholas II couldn't sleep. He sent a telegram to the Kaiser of Germany, and it reads thus: "I'm glad you're back. In this serious moment, I appeal to you to help me. An ignoble war has been declared to a weak country. The indignation in Russia shared fully by me is enormous. I foresee that very soon. I shall be overwhelmed by the pressure forced upon me and be forced to take extreme measures which will lead to war. To try and avoid such a calamity as a European war, I beg you in the name of our old friendship to do what you can to stop your allies from going too far. Nicky." Now you have to remember that these two men were cousins. They were friends. All the avenues of diplomacy had failed. All the standard bureaucratic mechanisms of the state were driving them to war, so they reached out to each other as cousins, as friends, to see if the two of them dealing directly person to person could avoid this war. They even called themselves as Willie and Nicky. The Kaiser is awake too, and he responds. A flurry of telegrams gets sent back and forth. At the end of these correspondences, Nicholas picks up the phone, calls Yanukovych, and tells him to call off the general mobilization. But on the 30th of July, Tsar had a long meeting with Sazonov, head of the Russian parliament, and the patriarch of the Orthodox Church. After that, eventually he signed this order. That moment, everyone was in a trap. This was the age of the trains. All around Europe, it was thought that if you could just get your army to the battlefield while the other guy's forces were still arriving, you'd crush them every time. You'd win without contest. But mobilization can take weeks. It is a huge task to coordinate and move the millions of men that made up a modern army. If Russia stopped mobilization and then Austria or Germany decide to attack, they'll have lost the war without a fight. So Russia can't stop mobilization. But if Russia mobilizes, that means Germany has to mobilize too or face the same dilemma. And now, with Germany mobilized, what can France do but mobilize themselves? A month later, 1 million men are dead. The catastrophe has begun. If you like the video, subscribe and write in comments which topics you want to see next. Thank you, bro.